Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here and thank you for being online with us. It's great to see you all. I think we have a really great topic today, one that many of us, I don't know, we're all kind of scratching our heads. What's happened out there? Are we back to normal? Is we're doing something different? What's going on? And so it's going to be, we've put together a really nice program, I think, that's going to address that from many different perspectives. So I'm Kimberly Collins. I'm the director of the London Transportation Center from Cal State San Bernardino. And we have a couple of our other folks who are going to give welcomes this morning, and we'll have them give that welcome, and then we'll introduce our great group of speakers. So I'd like to invite up a great sponsor for us, Matt Bushman, who is online up there with HNTB. Matt, please.
Kimberly, good morning. I'm looking forward to the topic today. Yeah, as you mentioned, my name is Matt Bushman, Inland Empire Group Director for HNTB, and just a proud sponsor for a number of years for this group and this important program. Looking forward to hearing from everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for your sponsorship and, of course, for being here today to join us. Our next welcome is from a dean from my college. He is a new player, but not so new anymore, as he's almost finished his first academic year with us. Dr. Tomas Gomez Arias, please. Dean Gomez Arias.
Kim and everyone, good morning. I don't have that excuse anymore of being here after a year. Thank you all for being here. I really look forward to a great conversation, and I'm interested. I'm really interested with how to deal with whatever the new normal is going to be.
Thank you, Dean Gomez Arias. And then I'd like to just thank our other sponsors. So HNTB has really been a great partner and sponsor with this event since its very beginning. This is our 32nd dialogue, amazing as that might seem. And I also like to thank the San Bernardino International Airport. They've always been a great sponsor, and Ontario International Airport, all coming in at our platinum sponsors. We have our gold sponsors who are Woodruff, Spraden, and Smart, and the SoCal Gas. And then we have a number of silver sponsors who really, such as Omnitrans, who is not only providing a little bit of financial help, but also providing us this great space and support with all of their staff. We really appreciate it, Aaron and everybody from Omnitrans, because it's great to be here. And it's great to see you all in person, and it's great to have the support because, you know, we're a scrappy little unit working out there. And then I'd also like to thank Foothill Transit, who is on the planning committee, but also a great sponsor and really been supportive. Our two main transit agencies out there who are supporting the work. And then a number of PPM Group, Metrolink, GLA, Sarusa, Guida, TRC, SCAG, Lane, and XEP. So we have a really nice group of folks who are helping the dialogues continue and be part of this community. So again, today's topic, back in the office, traffic patterns in the Inland Empire. And we'll start with a really quick poll question. Have you observed any changes in traffic patterns during your commute pre-pandemic to today? So what have you observed out there in changes that's been going on since pre-pandemic to today's world? So a majority says, yes, we've seen a change. So with that, we'll bring up our first speaker, who is Sean Resley, who's a senior transportation planner for Fears and Peers. And he's going to give us a bit of overlay on data collection, but also thinking about what they've been seeing with the with traffic change. So Sean, welcome.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for waking up bright and early and attending this dialogue. On a Tuesday. A little bit about me. I'm Sean Resley. Last name is pronounced Receipt without a T. And I am a senior transportation planner, engineer, data scientist at Fair and Peers. I've been with Fair and Peers for about 2 years, and we're a transportation planning and traffic engineering consulting firm. We work across the nation. I'm based out of the Long Beach office. But I work a lot in geographic information science and data science, background in environmental management, Got my bachelor's at the University of Hawaii and master's at Cal State Long Beach, and some of my hobbies: surfing, paddling, anything outdoors, golfing. What I'll be covering today is, as Kimberly mentioned, we are in an age of data enrichment. There's a lot of data that we have access to. Sometimes it's overwhelming. So I'll be covering from the big data lens what big data is, an overview of big data, how we can use it, some big data use cases, and then give highlight an example within the Inland Empire how we use big data to assess travel patterns within the San Bernardino County region, pre and post COVID, pre and post quote unquote, and how we were expecting to see changes in patterns, the amount of people traveling, why they're traveling, and then just going through some of the fact sheets that were the core deliverables for that project and how we effectively communicated the results of origin destination assessment, travel patterns using big data, and then open it up for any questions after that. So what do we mean by big data? In the information age, the movement of people and goods generates an enormous amount of data. Therein lies the potential to add great value and insight when planning transportation decisions. Big data is no longer an emerging technology, and the options are diverse and adaptive, and can be used to address both simple and complex questions through advanced technologies and insightful analyses. And when I say big data is diverse, not only are there hundreds of vendors, but there are dozens of unique data sources that make up the big data source pool. Some of these include cell phone signals, location-based services, which I'll get into. I just wanted to highlight that second source. That's what primarily that source of big data is what I'll be covering today. But others include transit sensors, GPS in vehicles, Bluetooth, smart parking meters, the list goes on. So there's so many sources of big data that you can pull from and tap into and gain insight about travel patterns within the real world. Next slide, please. So what are the key aspects of big data that set it apart from other conventional transportation informed data sources? Although not listed on here, I like to start with the 5 V's of big data. So that's volume, velocity, variety, veracity, and value. Volume is like the basis of big data, refers to the amount of data that exists. It wouldn't be called big data if there wasn't a huge volume of it. And what is considered big data is relative, though, and will change depending on the available computing power that's on the market. And that sort of definition of volume, that V of big data, is constantly evolving. Velocity refers to how quickly the data is generated and how quickly that data moves from the data provider to us as transportation consultants, transportation stewards, engineers. Variety refers to the diversity of data types. As I mentioned, there's a ton of different sources that it comes from. Veracity refers to the quality and accuracy of the data. Super important with such a saturated market of data vendors and types of data. It's important to know how accurate the data is that you're working with. And then the last one is value, which is self-explanatory. What value does that big data source pose? And I kind of view that V, the last V of value, as a requirement for deciding what data source to use. Some additional variations of big data. You can use it to look at the unit of analysis. So are you looking at, when looking specifically at transportation, are you looking at individual trips? Are you looking at trips occurring, starting, ending, traveling within a specific zone or land use? Are you isolating a roadway segment? Are you looking at types of events that are occurring within that zone or on a segment? Do you want to isolate vehicles that are, or do you want to find corridors or segments that have a high harsh acceleration, hard braking event density of vehicles? The persistence, so can we link a device's trips over time? So what that means is, can we look at how travel patterns are potentially changing and evolving over different time periods? Granularity, representativeness is the behavior of the big data, representative of all the users on the roadway or just a sample. Maturity, so is the data vendor and the data source an established, well-known data source, like streetlight data, for example, is a big data set that is more established versus maybe an emerging or startup provider that maybe doesn't have a ton of foundation behind it, but is, you know, emerging into the market. And then methodology transparency. So it's important to have white papers that as a data scientist and transportation consultant to reference, so that we know that how the data vendor is curating its big data set and validating their results and scaling potentially volumes up from their raw data points. Cost and licensing, critical. As you can imagine, big data can be quite expensive, but there are options that are a bit cheaper. There's different types of subscriptions. There are web-based portals and applications that you can pull the data from. So how user-friendly is the data? And then again, how available is the data? Can we look back in time to pull travel patterns from 2017, or can we look at last month's travel patterns for the month of March in 2023? So what is that availability? How much flexibility do we have? Next slide. And then, so I really like this representation, or this little infographic. I think it paints a pretty clear picture about how much data is out there, just in a given lens, in a given view. So going back to focusing on those 5 V's of big data, 2 are really representative in this snapshot, and that's variety and volume. So if you're just looking at a cross section of you know, an urban metropolitan snapshot of the roadway, you can see we have a rail line, we have a highway, we have a bike lane, and we have an urban sprawl behind it. Within this snapshot, there are so many connected devices within vehicles, within mobile phones, cellular towers, on bike share bicycles, parking meters that are all emitting location-based services or data related to the location and potentially the speed of how vehicles are traveling. And so this is where those big transportation data sets are extracted from. And there's so many nowadays that you can pull from. I don't want to focus too much on all of those, but this is really just painting a picture of how saturated the big data pool is nowadays. Next slide, please. Again, ton of big data vendors, some providing multiple attributes, multiple understandings of how the real world of transportation is occurring. We can see socioeconomic, looking at the socioeconomic characteristics of users of the roadway and the communities that serve those roadways and the roadways that serve those communities. I want you to focus on streetlight data. You can see streetlight data is the little black box with the yellow sun. It's in every single one of these categories, except for freight flow. And so that's the big data source that we used in San Bernardino County to assess travel patterns for the OD assessment. And you can see that big data not only allows you to understand how much traffic is out there, but also the why, the how, and the who of who is traveling. So how are trips being generated? What is the mode choice within an area? How are trips being distributed? Are they staying within a particular area? Are they shifting to a different county or different jurisdiction at different times of the day, days of the week? And then looking at that last component, calibration and validation, let's say you had counts for a particular roadway or for an area, you had firm like counts that you collected in the field, and you wanted to validate the results of the big data vendor. A lot of vendors nowadays allow you to calibrate their algorithm to conform to whatever counts you've collected in the field. Next slide, please. And so when you're starting a project using big data to assess travel patterns, there's a few questions that are a few things that you want to start to think about as you proceed before you kick off and proceed down the path of using big data to assess travel patterns. So what questions do you need to answer? What data sources are available to answer those questions? What analysis methods can provide insight into these questions? Who is the target audience? And how can the data set and analysis be used in the future? One that's not really on here is how can you communicate the results of that big data assessment of travel patterns? Visual communication is really key in effectively delivering the results of any sort of big data analysis, because you're pulling trillions and trillions of points and summarizing it into a meaningful manner that can explain or answer a question related to some sort of transportation issue or a finding that you're trying to communicate to a larger audience. Next slide. So kind of shifting the presentation a little bit, from the visual communication side, it's important to know how to communicate the results of big data. And so there's so many different visual communication software that can procure and curate really nice infographics that explain what is within the big data in an effective manner. So this is just a quick link and to a website and a web application called Flourish. You can upload big data, any sort of tabular data, and it creates really nice infographics that are map-based, that are dynamic. And so just a quick snapshot into the visual communication side of big data. Next slide, please. And then just getting into some project case studies. So big data has helped inform so many projects related to transit, related to active transportation, corridor studies, intersection analyses, turning movement analyses. The list goes on. So I just wanted to highlight a few examples that have been applied at Fair and Peers. So we've used it on a variety of transit studies. This is just looking at how did we use big data to help identify how many trips within the Seattle area and Washington could be converted to transit trips. And so you can see we're looking at it sort of on the right, a quick snapshot of the top 3 or the top trip flows that are coming out of that zone 7 and where they're traveling to. So you can see a lot are going to the Tacoma zone, a lot are going to the South Tacoma zone. So quick snapshot of how trips can be, trip distribution can be visualized using big data. Next slide, please. Corridor studies. So let's say you wanted to know for a particular venue or a land use or an area in a downtown region for users that are coming in and out of that area, what corridors are being most widely used. So how are trips distributed along the roadway network? So we can see the ingress and egress flows and sort of prioritize where improvements may need to be made because there's a high density of trips that are going to a particular zone or leaving a particular zone and using a corridor. So you can get pretty granular down to the segment level. Next slide, please. This is just a little application that allows you to interact with the big data at a zonal level. You can filter on the data to look at travel patterns by weekday or weekend, by time of day, AM peak, PM peak periods. You can scale the results of the map to isolate just particular areas of this region. And it also displays some high-level travel patterns on the right. So just a quick snapshot of how you can display results of big data. Next slide, please. Communication, again, the way that you communicate the results of big data in transportation is the most critical. And so The image on the right is for these in the state of Virginia. We wanted to look at where observed truck parking along truck routes is the highest, so that we can maybe expand or add additional truck stops along highways. And so we use streetlight data to identify where the truck parking density was the highest. And so using a contrasting background in the base map with a contrasting color that highlights where those truck parking density counts, or where density of truck parking is high, allows you to quickly identify, okay, it looks like in the southern Norfolk area, there's a high density of truck parking. And if you go north past Hampton into the Newport News area, you can see there's a density up there. So really easy to pull that information just from looking at a map. Next slide. And then origin destination studies. So this is sort of the bread and butter of a lot of big data sets, at least when big data was, the inception of big data came into transportation. So again, let's say you wanted to know for a particular highway, or maybe a particular neighborhood within an area, what is the trip distribution to different cities, different counties, for trips that use or interact with that particular area or corridor. For this assessment, looking at Highway 101, for trips that are traveling through this area that is indicated by the circle, we can see that a vast majority are traveling to Marin County, San Francisco County, and then just sporadically distributed to different areas. So big data is really useful in assessing how trips are moving and where they're going, where people are going. And so that is a core component of our analysis for the San Bernardino County example that I'll be getting into. But just wanted to show a few quick case studies and how we visualize the output of big data in our projects. Next slide, please. So moving forward to our project example, and kind of addressing the core of this dialogue. How have travel patterns changed in the age of this hybrid work environment? This origin destination assessment that we worked with the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority on to gain an understanding of how trip making occurs within San Bernardino County, why people are moving the way they are, what types of trips are they taking? Are they traveling from home? Are they traveling from home to work? Are they going from work to the grocery store? Are they traveling from home to a different area? So we really just wanted to get an understanding for every jurisdiction within the county and the county as a whole, how trip making occurs pre-pandemic and sort of towards the latter half of the pandemic, and if there was any changes in travel patterns. So you go next slide. So kind of reiterating, how do travel patterns fit into the regional picture? This project really highlights that. So we investigated the travel patterns for all 24 member jurisdictions and the unincorporated area. And we wanted to understand region-wide travel behaviors, including origin destination of trips from every agency, purpose, mode split, the distance that they're traveling, and the travel direction. Next slide. And again, the key questions that we wanted to answer was, one, how does trip making occur? What is the percent of trips in the county that are, what is the percent of trips in the county that are work related and non-work related? What percentage of work trips and overall trips travel outside of the region on a daily basis? What are the top 5 destinations for work trips leaving the county? And what percentage of persons by jurisdiction work in each city, work outside the city, but stay in the county and leave the region for work? And we looked at this in 2019 and post-pandemic towards the latter half of 2021 and 2022. Next slide, please. And the basis of this analysis was using streetlight data. And streetlight data is one of the founding big data sources in transportation. I think they came onto the onto the scene in the early 2010s. And so their core data source is called location-based services, which if you get on your phone and you open up an application and it says, would you like to share your location with this app? And you would say always or only while I'm using the application. Streetlight coordinates and works with these applications to purchase those location-based services from mobile devices and from in-vehicle GPS units, anonymizes all of that, and makes sense of how people are moving based off of their mobile devices and their GPS units within their vehicles. And that allows us to understand where people are starting their trips, how fast they're traveling, where they're going, how far they're going, how direct their trips are. Are they taking, detours because of some road closure? What types of people are traveling to different areas of to different areas of a city? The socioeconomic demographics associated with those trips. So Streetlight has become a core component. Streetlight data has become a core component of our work in transportation consulting to understand how travel patterns occur at different times of day, days of the week, and different periods of the year. Next slide, please. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to make sure that our analysis parameters were made sense for what we were trying to answer. Again, how trip making occurs within the San Bernardino County region, pre and post COVID. And so we wanted to isolate just two modes of travel. We looked at all vehicles within the county and trucks as well. We looked at two time periods, as you know, 2019, 2021/2022. We wanted to know travel time for trips that were starting or ending within the county. We isolated only weekdays. And then our output type was sample trip counts. And so what this means is we were able to know what is our total sample of trips that we are recording within each time period, day type, day part. So we can kind of get an understanding of what is our, how deep is our sample size and how representative of the actual real world is that sample size. And then we pulled the trip purpose so we can get an understanding of how trip making occurs. Next slide. And then the visual communication side of it, we put together fact sheets that highlight the key findings of the analysis, give a community profile, and give a snapshot of the commuting characteristics, travel activity, and show some maps of how trips are distributed from a particular agency or city, or from the county to other areas of the county or neighboring counties. And so this fact sheet is for the city of San Bernardino. And this is just one of the 25 fact sheets that we put together. So every city within the county had their own fact sheet to essentially use to get an understanding of how trip making occurs, what the community looks like, and how travel activity has changed, or what travel activity looks like, towards the end of COVID. And so some key findings that we can highlight for the city of San Bernardino. You can see that there's not much change when it comes to trips traveling within the city between 2019 and 2021, 2022, 50% and 46%. The home-based trips, home-based other trips, and home-based work trips, and those types of trips, there's not much change there. The key difference between 2019 and 2021 is we're seeing a significant decrease in sample size. That first little column in the key findings table with the two little arrows, you can see in 2019, our sample size was 7.2 million sample trips. And then in the 2021-2022 bucket, there was about 4 million trips. So we're seeing a pretty drastic decrease in just generally the amount of activity that was occurring within the city of San Bernardino over that 3-year duration. So that was the key finding, was just overall travel patterns didn't really change. Like trip making didn't really change, but the overall volume of trips decreased significantly. As we are, proceeding through 2023, it'd be interesting to look at, are we seeing that sample go back up following 2022 or 2021, 2022 as things are returning to normal? Or are we still seeing a lower sort of sample size because the hybrid work environment is keeping people, allowing people to work from home and not have to travel to and from work or to and from other locations as frequently. In the upper right, you can see we have a travel activity breakdown that shows the top 5 locations that were the top 5 origins or destinations for trips starting within the city of San Bernardino. So we can see a majority of trips stayed within the city, and the types of trips that made up most of those trips within the city of San Bernardino were mostly home-based other trips, which means people are traveling from their home to the grocery store or from their home to maybe like something that had nothing to do with work. And then non-home based trips. So they're traveling from a grocery store to another grocery store or grocery store to a friend's house. So there's no tie to their home location. And then the smallest majority of trips were home-based work trips. So you could see that trip purpose was the lowest bucket. So not too many trips were going from home to work. And you can see the next highest destination or origin for trips starting or ending in the city was unincorporated area, San Bernardino County, the Riverside County, the city of Highland, and then the city of Colton. So we're able to understand where people are going in the city of San Bernardino, why they're traveling, and how things maybe look a little bit different between different time periods. And so that's what this whole fact sheet gives a snapshot about. And we produce these for every city within the county. Next slide, please. This is just looking at the county-wide characteristics. Again, the key findings are quite similar to the city of San Bernardino. You can see our sample size in that key findings section of the fact sheet is significantly higher because we're looking at the entire county, but that ratio of 73 million to 45 million is pretty similar to that 7.5 million and 4 million from the city of San Bernardino. The trip purpose and trip making stayed relatively the same. And so that was, again, the key finding is huge decrease in travel and trip purposes for trips starting or ending in the county were mostly non-home based and were not home based to work. And so again, we're seeing a lot of trip making that has nothing to do with work. And so it kind of gets you thinking of how the hybrid work environment may have impacted that. And then on the right, we pulled some truck travel pattern data from the highway performance monitoring system. It's pretty hard to see the labels on the truck routes, but basically overall from 2018 to 2020, we're seeing a decrease in the number of truck trips along truck routes within the county on most truck routes.
Thank you very much, Sean. That was great. Really setting the tone for the other analysis that we're going to be seeing and the work that's to be done. But before we get to our next speaker, we have another poll question. Any changes in the use of building office space in your workplace community? Yes or no? So not as much, but still people are seeing the differences. So we're noticing things, and as everyone's being a social science out there, social scientists are observing our communities and what's happening. We're seeing the changes. So hopefully we'll find out a bit more about that. So our next speaker is a professor of economics from the University of California in Irvine, Jack Lieberson. And Dr. Lieberson, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here with all of you virtually. And what I'm going to talk about today is how remote work and work from home have changed real estate markets and changed the locations of where people live. since the start of the COVID pandemic and how that has continued to change and what it looks like going forward. So please feel free to, I'm going to try to leave time at the end for questions. I'll try to keep the presentation short and sweet. But also please feel free to follow up with me later by email. You can just look me up on the UC Irvine website or find my personal website. I'd always be happy to chat more about these topics. So what I'm going to talk about is 5 facts from the academic literature that's studied how remote work has changed housing markets, rental markets, and population movements. And what I'm hoping is that these facts provide some framing for the conversations about transportation that we're going to have over the next few hours. Full disclosure, I'm not a transportation researcher. I'm a real estate researcher, but I'm hoping that these the sort of academic facts that have been established recently provide important background in understanding the future of transportation. All right, let's go to the next slide. So the first fact is that the COVID-19 pandemic has increased the demand for housing. And that greater demand for housing since 2020 has not come down yet. So what do I mean by the demand for housing? Well, what I mean by that is that people want bigger houses now than they did in 2017 or 2018. Why do they want bigger houses? Or why do they want more space? There are a couple of reasons for that. The first one is that people spent more time in their homes. During the pandemic, the value of being in a big city where you could go to bars and, I don't know, interact with people in social environments was lower. And instead, people spend more time by themselves or with their families in their homes, and therefore they wanted more space. The second reason is the increase in remote work. That is something that really took off in around 2020 during the pandemic. And surprisingly, hasn't come down very much since then. It has come down to some degree, but survey evidence of individuals and of companies shows that it's expected to continue. And what that means is that people want more space for their home offices. What this graph here shows is the rate of household formation, or the growth in the rate of household formation. So that means the number of new households, the increase in the rate of the number of new households every year starting in the year 2001. So this figure comes from a paper from Ozimek and Carlson, and it's based on census data. And what it shows is that the formation rate of new households kept pretty steady at between 0.5 percentage point and 1 percentage point all the way through 2019. And then starting in 2020 and 2021, there was a huge increase in the rate of household formation. So what does that mean? That means people moving out from their roommates, out from their parents, establishing their own homes. And that, of course, will increase the demand for housing. What is the implication of that? Well, the implication of that comes on the next slide. So let's go to the next slide. So what that's meant is there's been a huge increase in housing costs over this exact time period. And that increase in housing costs has slowed down, but it hasn't quite reversed yet. That's not quite true. In the last few months, there's some evidence of a partial reversal, but basically housing costs more than it did pre-pandemic. The figure on the left shows rents over time, the national average, using data from Zillow. It's indexed to January 2020. So January 2020 is set at 100, and it's adjusted for the overall rate of inflation. So what this figure shows is that even after adjusting for inflation, there was a dramatic increase in the national average rent from January of 2021 to December of 2021. So it looks like a one-time increase that's permanent and hasn't returned back to trend yet. There's some evidence from the last few months of rents falling again, but overall it looks like a shift in housing costs that hasn't really gone away for renters. The increase in costs for homes has been even more dramatic. That's shown in the figure on the right, where again, I've indexed home prices to January 2020. And again, this figure comes from Zillow data on home prices. So what you can see here is a large increase in the real price of homes for sale on the market. And that has occurred despite the increase in interest rates, which has reduced the demand for mortgages. These trends are the result of that increase in demand for housing that I showed you on the previous slide. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, the third fact is that people have shifted where they want to live. So as home prices have gone up, people have shifted the location, in part because they're able to work remotely. This figure illustrates the changes, and it comes from a new paper about the effects of remote work on population. The x-axis is the log median house value by city. So that means that you can interpret the changes in this roughly as percentage differences. The y-axis is the percent population change for each city from 2020 to 2021. What you can see, what this figure shows, is that the most expensive cities, the cities furthest to the right in the figure, have seen large falls in population. The cities that have cheaper house prices, so places further to the left in the figure, have either seen their population increase or held remote about steady. So why is this happening? Well, I think a major reason it's happening is that remote work has allowed people to move out of the most expensive places and move into a lot cheaper places where they can afford those larger homes that they're demanding because of remote work. Next, I'm going to zoom in a little bit further into what's happening within cities and what that means in Southern California. So let's move on to fact 4 in the next slide. So what I just showed you was national trends. People are moving away from the most expensive locations, and they're moving into cheaper cities. This slide shows you differences between different neighborhoods in a city. And what it shows is that similar trends have happened. This figure shows the population inflows and outflows from different types of regions within each city. And again, it's indexed to January of 2020, and it shows population movements on a monthly basis since then. The blue line shows population movements into or out of city centers. The black line shows population movements into or out of high density regions within cities. The red line shows you population movements for exurbs, and the green line for suburbs. So what is this figure showing? Well, if we follow the path of the blue line, what you can see is that February 2020, the start of the COVID pandemic, saw a tremendous outflow of population from city centers, and to a lesser degree from high density parts of cities. Exurbs, the regions at the sort of far boundaries of the cities, saw population movements inwards, and suburbs were roughly constant. Now, there are a couple of things about this figure I want to draw your attention to. The first is that the big population movements all happened in 2021, and to a lesser extent in 2022. The second thing is that those population movements have slowed down, but they haven't reversed. So what that means is that there was a one-time shift of people out of city centers, and they haven't come back yet. So they're not moving out of city centers anymore to the same degree they were at the height of the pandemic. But at the same time, there hasn't really been a recovery of city centers either. Because if there were, then we would expect to see a reversal in this figure. So this data comes from post office change of address requests, which were made available through a FOIA request as part of academic research. And are now available to anyone online. So if you're interested in studying how populations have moved across zip codes, you can just look up this data online and do this calculation for your own city. So in the spirit of doing this calculation for your own city, let's move to the next slide. And we can look at how population have shifted in Southern California. So I pulled this data from basically the US Postal Service for 4 major counties, or I guess 5 major counties in Southern California: Ventura County, San Bernardino County, Orange County, LA County, and Riverside County. And then I graphed the percent population changes from 2020 to 2022. So over the total percent population change over those 2 years. And they're shown in the figure here. What you can see in the figure in the lower left is a cluster of zip codes centered around downtown LA, where populations have fallen. So in the CBD of downtown LA, populations fell in each zip code by between 2% and 4%. The same is true in the sort of coastal areas around Malibu and up the coast. Now, moving out from downtown LA, you can see the sort of suburban ring zip codes outside of downtown. So this includes a lot of Orange County, parts of San Bernardino County, and Ventura County. There have been population increases. So it looks like what's happened is that people have moved out of the downtown and into the suburban ring outside of the town. And we think that a lot of those changes happened during the pandemic, but they haven't reversed. And the reason they haven't reversed is because of the rise of remote work, which has enabled people to commute in only a few days a week or to do their work entirely remotely. Now, looking even further out from downtown LA towards some of the exurban zip codes, some of the areas where the commutes to downtown are a bit longer, the pattern is a little bit more mixed. Some zip codes have seen population increases, others have seen population decreases, and similar to the national trends, there isn't much of a net effect. Populations have remained roughly constant. So these 2 slides have just shown you how populations have changed. What does this mean for real estate prices in these areas? So let's go to the next slide. What it's meant for real estate prices is that there's been a divergence between city centers, suburbs, and exurbs. So the figure on the left shows how rents have changed in each area relative to each other. Again, this uses national data. This is Zillow data on rents split up by different regions within each city. So again, the blue line is city centers, the black line is high density areas, the green line is suburbs, the red line is exurbs. What you can see in the figure on the left is that from 2018 to 2020, rents in each of these different regions moved roughly in parallel. They're tightly clustered, all increasing at roughly the rate of inflation. But starting at the beginning of the pandemic, rents in city centers and high density parts of cities fell relative to suburbs and exurbs. Since then, there's been a recovery, but there's a permanent divergence in rents. They haven't caught up again. Rents in city centers are now something like 7 or 8% lower than in exurbs relative to 2020. This figure on the right shows the same thing, but for home values. Before 2020, home values in these different parts of the city were moving roughly in parallel, but since then there's been a huge divergence. Home values have increased everywhere, but they've increased a lot more in exurbs than they have in the city center. Home prices in the city center have increased by less than 10%, which is below the rate of inflation. Whereas home values in exurbs have increased by something like 40%. And all of that reflects those same population movements that I showed you on the previous slide. So this is the 5th fact I wanted to tell you about real estate markets. Let's conclude by looking at housing affordability in Southern California once again. So on the next slide, I made the same graph, but here I'm showing house price changes in percentage terms from 2020 to 2022. And I'm looking at the zip code level for the same 5 counties. So this is Ventura County, San Bernardino County, Orange County, LA County, and Riverside County. Once again, in the lower left, you can see the zip codes centered around downtown LA, where house prices have either fallen or have increased by relatively little, roughly by the rate of overall inflation. In the suburban ring around that, house prices have increased by a lot more, 20%, 30%, in some cases even 40%. And those increases are greater the further you go away from downtown. Why is that? Well, the reason, of course, is because of the rise of remote work. As people are able to live further away from the downtown, they move to areas where they can afford bigger homes, afford those home offices, and the commutes aren't as much of a problem anymore. And so they've moved to these further away zip codes, don't commute as often to work, and that has raised house prices in those areas and increased populations, as I showed you a few slides ago.
Thank you, Dr. Lieberson. That's very interesting. So we wanted to set sort of that tone of what's happening, because we all know that our real estate market is attached to our transportation sector. So to give an overview of what's happening in the real estate world, and we'll have our next poll question, and then we'll dig deeper into the data for the Inland Empire. And so this one, again, just a little softball to see. SBCTA, a regional agency. I know this crowd is going to be a tough crowd because everyone knows SBCTA, but it's responsible for transportation planning in the San Bernardino region. Just trying to get people to think about our agencies. Can't help it. Public administration professor, like people to think about the different agencies that are out there. And this is going to help because I think Ginger also wants to bring up a little bit on doing some community outreach and getting more engaged with our data. So we have our next speaker who's here in person. Yep. Ginger Klobas, thank you very much. Senior planner for the San Bernardino Transportation Authority. Thank you, Ginger.
I'm Ginger Kublas. I am a senior planner with San Bernardino County Transportation Authority. Been there about 25 years. Most of my time there was spent in GIS in a basement, looking at numbers and maps. They let me out of the basement in 2019. I'm now a senior planner there. I still sneak back in because there's some fun data to work with, and it really does help, I think, our region make more informed decisions, but you really do need the mix of subjective and objective. So for us, and I'm sorry, my spiel will be a little bit San Bernardino County focused because that's what I'm familiar with. I know this is more Inland Empire audience though. So planning for the future, how do we do it? Especially now that we don't know a lot. We've realized we really don't know a lot after the pandemic. That's one thing we learned. I don't know how many agencies properly prepared for that. I know it caught us by surprise. And I think it did others as well. So now with that in our minds, we're looking at, okay, how do we plan for the future? And we don't know what other things might be heading our way, floods, fires, earthquakes, another pandemic of some sort. And how will that impact our population? Where will that go? Will it change immigration, birth rates, death rates? And then how will the employment sector be impacted? We've seen some changes there as well. And then, of course, how will policies change in the future? And that's a two-way. Sometimes events impact policies and sometimes policies impact events. So we're trying to plan for that without having any really control over any of those factors. So next slide. So changing dynamics, Inland Empire population increases. One thing we learned during the pandemic was that there were quite some changes in the population, as Dr. Lieberman discussed. So from 2020, Inland Empire was, we pulled in the biggest household gain, similar to Phoenix, Arizona. That pushed up housing prices, like he said, and it pushed out some middle, lower income families that had to move out. For every 10 people that moved to the Inland Empire, 8 moved out. So we did obviously have a net gain, but it was a definite change in the personalities that lived there. So over the last 30 years, Inland Empire has grown by 77%, whereas the the whole state of California only grew by 30%. So definitely concentration in here. I found an article and I'm happy to share my slides. I'm not as good at crediting my sources, but in a really tiny print. There's my source. About 400,000 people moved out of Los Angeles and Orange County. And just in one community in Riverside alone, they ranked the third highest in the nation for population growth between, I think it's 2018 and 2022. They gained 36,000 people in just one community. So we have increases to work on. Next slide, please. And just nationally, as far as the work from home goes, you can see these are percentages, and driving alone went down from 2019 to 2021. Yeah, everything kind of went down. Unfortunately, transit went down, everything, but work from home went up. So next slide. That's according to census data. The pandemic also added e-commerce. So not only did people not want to have to put on clothes to go to work anymore, we didn't want to do it to go shopping. So we started buying more online, and it went up a considerable amount, 218 billion in e-commerce between 2020 and 2021. Next. I'm going to blow through these because really all these events really did happen really fast. So it'll give you a sense of the whirlwind we went through. So this is big warehousing, how much that went up. So in addition to all these residents and population, we're having to think about freight, and that increases in freight, and the big warehousing has gone up nationally. But then next slide, you'll see it also, of course, went up locally for some of the reasons that Dr. Lehman was addressing, as far as having more land, having more affordable land. And then if you can go to the next slide, it shows more Inland Empire specific. The bottom line is the Inland Empire warehousing growth, and then it's coming up at the end. Not only do we have more land, more affordable land, we have workers who can live nearby affordably, but we're also ideally located between the Los Angeles ports and Long Beach ports. So a lot of freight coming in to folks who are buying stuff that lands on our porch. Next slide. So this is the change in sectors for the Inland Empire between 2019 and 2021. You can see the warehousing storage unit that has gone up, but I'm happy to share slides if anybody wants the slides later. They are documented. And then you can see down at the bottom left, teachers unfortunately have gone down. Then next slide. This is another demographic or graphic showing the increases in population growth for employment sector of warehousing. What bar to the far left is housing, warehousing employment is considered continued to grow between 2018 to 2020 by 50+%, 52%, I think it showed. So that just shows all the tiny print. That's warehousing, storage, that's construction. But these are the top 20 according to the Employment Development Department, Economic Development Department, EDD. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is kind of a fun one. Back to the big data that Sean was mentioning. This is a different source. It's from Clear Guide. Iteris puts it out. So this is a graphic that shows traffic speeds in 2019 at 7 a.m. And if you look at one of those arrows, I don't know how well you can see, but when he goes, the next slide will be for 2023 at 7 a.m. And you'll see where areas are darker. If he hits the next slide, you'll see those go lighter. And these are traffic speeds. I don't know. It's hard if you're not, you can go back and forth one more time real quick just to show anybody wants to look at their line again, 2019. So we're not back to where we were, suffice it to say. Now the 10 is a little bit, might be skewed because we have some construction going on there. People might be avoiding that. But overall, things aren't quite there. They seem to be going there, but how much of that's going to be work from home? Trying to get to places, or is that going to be backfilled by freight? And if you look at the next slides, just to give you an idea of, so we, SPCTA participates with collecting growth forecasts from our member jurisdictions for the regional housing for the regional transportation plan for SCAG's plan. So when we collected it for the 2020 RTP, this is what our member jurisdictions thought the dispersal of growth was going to be between 2016 and 2045. If you look up, every blue dot is 10 occupied households, every red dot is 10 jobs. So this is just to give you an idea of the density. So last RTP cycle, this is the way the cities thought would grow, not knowing anything about pandemic or the increase in e-commerce and warehouses in this area. And you can see, like in Ontario, they thought a lot of growth was going to be down here in the ag preserve, which it will. And you can keep an eye. North Montana thought quite a bit of housing up there. Rancho was a little bit more dispersed. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see how it changed to this recent RTP cycle. This is now for what we just recently collected from the cities, how they think they'll grow. The airport is over here. And you can see all the red, all the jobs that they're now planning for near the airport. Rancho as well, planning much more condensed growth down near the center. Fontana still says some up there. We've got the pass that goes through. And so that have a lot of wind, but still some land left there. So that's, and we have it available on our website. If anybody wants to poke around, you can do a slider that'll show pre and post densities. And then the next slide. So how to plan for the unknown. SBCTA recently received a grant award from Caltrans to develop a long-range multimodal transportation plan. So we're going to attempt to, we now know it's silly to, we used to just do baseline and aggressive, you know, 2 different scenarios, but now we need to broaden the scenarios out a little bit more and look at it not just, you know, for big picture, but also by each sector type, you know, transit, rideshare, freight, zero emissions, consider all those, and then what the policies or funding might be and how things might look. If funding is this way, what would it look for transit in the desert? Or, you know, so just really trying to get a handle of how it would impact the different sectors, mode choices, and then also how to identify funding sources for implementation, try to guess at what the policies might be, how based on how they're going, but also to collect other plans. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel. If other plans have already done some research, we're going to integrate that into this as well. Just getting kicked off. So there will be lots of stakeholder meetings, lots of online, and then, you know, how we can go about that and looking for suggestions and going out there. So that was the end of my presentation. On the last slide, I'll just show my phone number and email if you want to get a hold of me for any reason, particularly if you want to give input for the long range multimodal transportation plan. We would love to hear from you and have your participation in that. It's still just getting kicked off. So if you go to the website, sbcta.com/LMRTP.
All right, Ginger, thanks so much. And it's, you know, the joys of doing things hybrid. So we're figuring out as we go along. All right, thank you. We have our last poll question with our last speaker, and then I am looking forward to having a discussion around all of these pieces of information and these facts that we learned. So our next poll question, pretty simple. Have you ever heard about IE Commuter before today's presentation? So most people have heard about IE Commuter. I kind of did, but you know, not so much. So I'm going to put myself in a no. All right. So our next speaker is from IE Commuter. We have Brenda Ressa, who's an employer services representative. And Brenda, you're up.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Brenda Ressa. I'm an employer service rep for the IE Commuter team. Today, I will be discussing commute choices, patterns, resources for the Riverside and San Bernardino counties. I will be introducing you to who is IE Commuter, the upcoming events, commute choices and patterns, all the region's resources, and last but not least, an incentive overview. Next slide, please. Perfect. So who is IE Commuter? Who are we? What do we offer? IE Commuter is the rideshare program of the Riverside County Transportation Commission and San Bernardino County Transportation Authority. Our mission is to reduce traffic and improve air quality in the region by helping business develop employee rideshare bus, train, carpool, vanpool, telework, bike, and walk programs. The IE commuter program is free to employers. Simply sign up, promote the benefits of ride sharing to your employees, and enjoy the rewards. So some of the highlights of our program: we offer incentives on no cost, marketing materials, event support, workshops, online webinars, commute logs, and also we support South Coast Air Quality Management District Average Vehicle Ridership Survey. In a few minutes, I will go over the program highlights, but first I would like to introduce myself. Next slide. A little bit about me. I have been on the IE commuter team for about 7 years now. I support with Rule 2202. I support all commuter benefits, and I'm one of the coordinators for National Rideshare Week in-person events and bi-yearly marketing workshops. And now let's mark your calendars. Some of the upcoming events that we have are Happy Earth Week. This Saturday is Earth Day. Next month, we will be hosting our spring marketing workshop. If you would like to attend this in-person event, please reach out to our team and we will get in contact with you. Bike to work. Some employers like to celebrate the entire month. Some employers just celebrate the week of or the day of. And everybody wants to dump the pump. So June 17th is the official date. Mark your calendars. Every month can be turned into a Rideshare Awareness Month. We're going to speak about commute choices and patterns. What are some of the rideshare commute choices? Today, I'm going to share with you 7 rideshare modes that do not include drive alone. In the next few slides, I will provide a breakdown of each of the modes, but first, let me show you some of these commute patterns. Next slide, please. Thank you. What is great about the IE commuter platform is that every time the commuters log a trip, we capture the data. We capture greenhouse gases, vehicle miles reduced, vehicle miles traveled, and even total cost saving. It's not surprising that most of our commuters are carpooling, right? With 21% of our commuters, it's the most common rideshare mode. Vanpool has increased. Just last year, 18% of our commuters were selecting vanpool as a rideshare mode. Telework, a lot of commuters are teleworking with a hybrid schedule, so telework came in at 11%. Although these are the top 3 rideshare modes, there are still commuters actively walking, biking, and riding the train to work. So how can the IE commuter team support you with each of these modes? In the IE commuter website, there is in the IE commuter homepage, there is an option for your best commute. By selecting commute options, you can click on each individual mode. This page will direct you directly to the mode you selected. For example, here we have bus and train. In our website, you can use our trip planner to plan out your commute. Here we have carpool and vanpool. Carpool is just the easiest form of building the habit of ride sharing. And vanpool is one of our top 3 modes, right? In this page, you can learn more about the subsidy towards vanpooling. Not sure what vanpool agency to get in contact with? Well, on our page, we have a great tool that you can enter the city you work at, and that will provide you the specific agency that you will be in contact with to start your vanpool program. And a fun fact on vanpool, at CSUSB, we have 1 active vanpool commuting from Apple Valley to the campus. There are currently 10 riders on this roster, and this vanpool has been receiving the $400 subsidy from SB Loop since August of 2021. We have a lot of telework resources available for you to download on our website by selecting the telework icon. And the next slide. And here we are down to our 2 most active rideshare modes, biking and walking. On the IE commuter website, there is a link that you can learn more about how you can board your bike when taking the bus to work. And walking, well, walking is one of our healthiest rideshare modes. Remember, when it comes to ride sharing, it doesn't always have to be a daily commute, but it is something that you can implement in your day-to-day schedules. Next slide, please. So what resources do we have for the region? Next slide. Regardless of the size of your employer or the location of your employer site, we can help you customize your rideshare program. For large employers who comply with Rule 2202, we can assist you with this regulation. Ride matching in our database ride matches increases every day in our database, so we are ready to help ride matching on demand. iCommuter has tools that will help you with marketing support so that our employers don't have to come up with any of these templates. We have the resources. Every employer of iCommuter has access to vehicle miles reduced, greenhouse gases reduced, every time their employees log a trip on our website. A few other resources that we have available to our employers are webinars. Every month we offer an office hour segment where we discuss the trendy rideshare topics. As I mentioned earlier, our spring workshop is going to be May 2nd, and we always host a second event in the fall. Rideshare Week, the funnest campaign of all. We have lots of sponsored prizes that our commuters can win by logging the trips the month of October. And to wrap this up, we have event support. We staff all your benefit fairs, new hire orientations, and lunch and learns. Some of the tools that we have available are also electronic and printed posters, brochures, we have promotional items, we have email communications, and we have a monthly newsletter. We also can create customized ride guides. All materials are available in both English and Spanish. And now let's get into commuter incentives. So here's a quick description of each of the incentives we have available. Our $5 a day is valid for new commuters in the Riverside and San Bernardino counties. We have our monthly rideshare spotlight, which after receiving the $5 a day, commuters are automatically enrolled in this incentive as long as there is 8 round trips logged per month. We also have the monthly telework spotlight, which only requires 1 log per month. 2 winners are selected every month for each of the spotlights. And then we have one more incentive. We have our Guarantee Ride Home program. Our Guarantee Ride Home program covers our commuters when they need to commute back to home in the event of emergency or mandatory overtime. iCommuter reimburses twice a year per employee. And lastly, we want to hear from you. So let's take out your phones and make sure that you guys capture our next slides. Thank you. Here we have LinkedIn. Follow us on LinkedIn. It's one of our newest social media networks. Next slide. We also have different social media channels. We have Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Stay up to date with our important communication that we post on our social media. Next slide. And to end my presentation, I would like to share the information with some key members of the iCommuter team. Here's our incentive specialist, Alina Vesa. Her contact's available to you. She's ready to answer any questions that you might have about our incentives or our program overall. Want to join iCommuter? Reach out to CJ Jones. CJ has been with the iCommuter team for over 6 years and can help you with the simple steps of joining our iCommuter program. And again, my name is Brenda Reza. I hope you found this presentation helpful. Thank you for marking your calendars with our upcoming events. I hope you learned a little bit about our rideshare commute mode and the wonderful commuter incentives we have available to increase your ridership. Thank you for your time and participation.
All right, Brenda, thanks so much for that.
Of course.
So I'd like to open it up for discussion and questions that folks might have about the topic. Again, thinking about the big data, the ideas around real estate and options, and then also, you know, the data patterns that we're seeing with the traffic, and then other options with the iCommuter. I don't know, Brenda, if you have, I'm just going to start off this question. If you have sort of the change in the modes of commute, have people been moving from ride share to carpooling. Carpooling might many times be with someone that they know, so maybe they feel a bit more secure with carpooling. Did you see any
Right.
changes in those data?
We
from-
definitely did. We did notice there was a lot of options of carpooling. We had a lot of commuters who typically maybe work with a neighbor, a family member that felt comfortable enough jumping in the car with the person that they know well and carpooling to work. So throughout the years, we know that carpooling has been the top mode overall, but we also have seen the conversion of some of the carpoolers turn into van pooling due to the data that we can provide to these employers saying, here's a cluster of those employees who live in the same zone and travel at the same commute time to work.
All righty, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
And then if you have a question as well, we can, if you can put it, you're online, you can put it in the chat and, or we can make you live and you can ask the question. So don't feel as you're online, you can't ask a question. But we have a number of questions in the room here. Yes.
I was saying prior to the pandemic, a lot of the data said that the younger demographic and people were moving more downtown and a lot of transit oriented development was moving downtown. But it seems like now you're saying since the pandemic and remote working and stuff has kind of impacted that and you see the change going the other direction. Is this a younger demographic thing or is this something that is going across, I want to say age more so, if that's the right question?
I guess the answer is I'm not sure. The data we have doesn't split people by age, but it does. We do know that when you look at differences by family structure, it appears to be sort of everybody, and differences by housing type. Again, it appears to be all types of housing. So it looks like it's a broad-based phenomenon. It's not just younger people. It's not just older people. It's sort of everybody. But we'll know a little bit more clearly about that in the next year or two as more detailed census data gets released, basically. So I'm not totally sure, but it seems to be a pretty broad phenomenon.
Good morning, Lima Saft. I'm with Caltrans here in San Bernardino Riverside. I have a question for Brenda. My question is, in your tool, and I haven't looked at your tool, maybe that's where I should have started. Do you have commute suggestions for people who are commuting into Riverside, San Bernardino? Because there are a lot of people who live in Orange County or San Diego, Los Angeles, commuting into San Bernardino for work, even though they live in other areas. Are there opportunities for them to join one of those programs?
So our platform is built to ride match our commuters based on their start and end zone. So with them entering their information to the system and create a profile, it ride matches them with any of the commuters that take the same commute as they do. We can also support that employer or that commuter by looking outside their start and end time so that we can see if there's anybody else available to be halfway and they can meet at park and ride and leave their car there. Or maybe they take the metro in and then they get picked up there. So there's a lot of options where the commutes can be routed to not be a drive alone anymore.
Hello, my name is Junfei Hao. I'm with Cal State San Bernardino. My question probably also goes to Brenda. I'm one of those minorities that do not familiar with the IE commuter. I want to ask if there's any kind of a program for new mobilities from your department, things like shared scooters and shared bikes. On our campus, there's a lot of interest. In addition to ride sharing, are there some other kind of shared mobilities being considered? Thank you.
So at the time, we are not involved in a lot of the planning with any other mobility options, but that's definitely something that we can bring onto the team and do a little bit more brainstorming on. I definitely know that the campus itself has a lot of mobile scooters and that kind of options, but definitely it's something that we can plan out. On the website, there is a trip planner for biking that shows you some of the biking routes. So maybe that can be useful for them, but definitely something that we will brainstorm as a team.
All right. Thank you. Any other question? I want to throw it out to all of us and maybe I mean, what really are the implications here, particularly for the Inland Empire in thinking about transit? We're here, the home of Omnitrans, and having new folks living in the region. And if the majority of the trips are these short trips that are going to shopping or dropping their kids off at schools or thinking about the types of trips that are happening, what are the implications and what are the opportunities possibly not only in micro mobility, but also shared mobility. And then again, I was able to join Omnitrans with their board retreat and thinking about the future of transit, because as we know, nationwide transit's really suffering. So what are the implications for transit? Maybe, I don't know if our speakers, I don't know, Sean, if you have any thoughts on that, or I know it's a hard one. Ginger, if you have any thoughts, or maybe even Jack or Brenda, just what are we thinking about for the implications on shared mobility for this region? Lots of new people living in the region.
I think that I would say that the more that we put it out there and we let them know how easy it is to be in a different commute versus drive alone, we built the habit, right? They see that the resources are available to them and that they're just, and it's just one step away from building that habit and implementing it in their day-to-day schedule. They don't have to do it every day. We don't say, well, you have to ride share Monday through Friday. It's whatever day fits your schedule. So promoting that part of it, I think it's important so that they don't feel that they're tied into having to do it on their 8 to 5 schedule, their Monday through Friday schedule. So teaching them, guiding them through the website, at least through our website, letting them know who their local transit partners are, transit agencies, schedules, route fares, and that kind of information would, start building the habit of, you know what, maybe this is for me. I can build this into my day-to-day commutes.
Yeah. Another thought here.
Normally, when we consider taking public transportation, we compare that to how long it would take us to drive. Is the tool that we have or tools give us that comparison? Would we be able to say, oh yeah, it only will take me 5 more minutes to take a bus as opposed to drive? Definitely, I'll consider that. But if it's twice as long, or for some of us even more than that, then it's all good that we have all these options. But are people going to actually take advantage of that?
Mm-hmm. I think what twice as long means, if you're
If
thinking
it's 5
about 1
minutes to
hour
10.
versus 2 hours,
Right.
or if you're thinking 15 minutes versus 30 minutes. Because the other day I went to a city and they had a nice commuter rail, and it was 15-minute drive, but it was a 30-minute commuter rail. I was like, yeah, $2, as opposed to $20 to take the shared ride. Seems the calculations there. So it's having the data points that people, again, suppose I'm going to do my quote unquote, are rational, and they use all of the data to make their decisions using those different points. So depends what that share is. Yes, Steve, please.
Yeah, hi, Steve Smith, Director of Planning at SBCTA. And as Ginger stated, we're just beginning our long-range multimodal transportation plan. And we are, as much as anyone, trying to figure out, especially, for example, for the downtown LA office market, what the future actually looks like. Because obviously there is at least some degree of correlation between the office workers downtown and how transit, especially Metrolink. And obviously we've had a big drop in Metrolink ridership, which is a concern. So my question goes back to the real estate knowledge we have, and that is, I missed a little bit of the presentation on that, but the downtown office occupancy rates, what does anyone have a projection of recovery in that market? And because if they're going to continue to be depressed, that means transit to downtown is going to be not what it used to be either. So we're all trying to figure out what's the next 5-10 years look like. Any additional thoughts from the office market standpoint, both in terms of occupancy and the population in there, given that you might not be going into work 2 or 3 days a week?
Yeah, Jack, do you have any, has there been any research or thoughts on the change in office space, particularly in downtown areas?
Yeah, there's been a lot of research on that. Office space has really suffered in recent years. Vacancies are high, and prices for office buildings have fallen substantially. And that's due to a combination of the high interest rates, because commercial real estate responds to high rates more quickly than residential, as well as the rise of remote work. I think this is a serious concern. People should, city planning departments need to take account of this. There's been a lot of discussion also about office to residential conversions, but of course those are very difficult and very expensive. Problems are much more severe for downtown office space than for suburban and exurban office space, for sort of some of the same reasons I discussed before. Overall, the prospects for office space in downtown areas just don't look that great. I would say this is a more severe problem in New York and San Francisco, which are more centralized as compared to Southern California, where a lower fraction of the office space is in downtown LA and in city downtowns. But it's still a serious issue that I'll need to keep in mind.
Does anyone have projections from the real estate standpoint of future changes in occupancy? Because we're all crystal balling it here, and from a transit perspective, if at least we had some data that someone's bold enough to get out there and take a stab at what the future looked like, that might help our analysis from a transportation standpoint.
Let me send some, so I'll follow up with the organizers, or feel free to follow up with me and send some links to some of the research on it. I'm not sure if it contained projections because, academics don't like to make predictions because then they might be proven wrong. But let me at least send you what there is, and hopefully it'll be helpful.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We have another question online. Franklin, Frank?
This is Frank from Cal State San Bernardino. Tech on Steve's question in related to the office space. Do you have information or data relevant to the warehouses? Because in our region, I think warehouses has been growing tremendously. So that's the question.
Well, what I find is interesting is that we've had this increase in, Sean, I don't know if you could add into this, but, and maybe we can bring up Sean's map. So we have this increase in warehouse space, but this is the price of spacing. But for 13 years, there's been 1,100 new warehouse spaces. But Sean, your data is showing that there's a decrease in the number of trucks that are along the major highway points. Could you bring that slide up so that maybe we can just look briefly at that as well? So some of the implications, and it possibly could be, right, that the warehouse space is getting too expensive. The land space, as we see, has gone up quite a bit for the Inland Empire, and so some of that's changing.
So from 2018 to 2020, there was a decrease in truck volumes on truck routes. But we have seen those truck volumes increase since 2020 to sort of stabilize to pre-pandemic conditions. To your point, Frank, on the data related to, the number of warehouses within the region and even the number of employees that serve those warehouses, I'm blanking on the data set. There is a data set that can give you the quantity of warehouse employees for every warehouse within a region. Let me circle back with the organizers on that, but I can point you to a data set that can give you pretty recent estimates on the number of warehouses and the number of employees at each warehouse. So you can see how things change over time, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, exactly. That's,
So this implication on the number of trips coming into San Bernardino County, almost, what is that?
So what the maps are showing in the bottom right of the trip distribution side, so on the left fact sheet, those two maps at the bottom right, the top one is showing all vehicle distribution for trips within the county and two adjacent counties, and then the one on the below that is the trucks. So we can see that a majority of trips that are starting and ending within the county are not leaving. So 86% of all vehicles are sort of intra-county, but we're seeing an increase in trips to Riverside County for all vehicles, and then an increase for trucks going to LA County. So that's really what this is showing, is how are personal vehicle trips and truck trips being distributed if they have an endpoint within the county. So a lot staying within the county, but also moving to LA County and Riverside County.
My name is Rafi. I'm also from Cal State San Bernardino. So my question is, if let's say 80 or 85% of the trips, and this is for Sean or Ginger, if 80 or 85% of trips are within the county itself, why that number or that percentage is not recognized as an opportunity for transit agencies or train stations or any sort of transportation rather than car to cover the demand of commute? And what do you think for future should be done in order for this alternative transportation modes to be more efficient and effective to serve these demands within the county itself?
That's a good question, Rafi. So I think there's an additional step that you want to look at is the first last mile connection to transit providers. And so what we're able to understand from streetlight data as well is for these intra-county trips, so the 85% of trips that we're seeing staying in the county, what percent of those are shorter trips? So maybe 10 miles or less or 5 miles or less. There could be an opportunity to convert some of those to an active mode or some sort of non-vehicular mode that can connect to transit providers. And so I think from that lens, being able to look at, again, the shared mobility and mode split, how can we convert some of those shorter trips to connect to transit and then use transit as like the primary mode of choice for those longer trips?
Yeah.
Does that partially answer your question, Rafi?
Yeah, I would hear Ginger also on this.
I think you're absolutely correct. This is an opportunity that transit hopefully can take advantage of, and doing first mile, last mile. It's something our plan wants to look into is, how, I think that's something that's been a very big thing in this area, is how do we get transit riders back? Because there's just so many benefits. And I don't need to tell this crowd the benefits of transit. So yeah, let's figure out how to make that happen. Oh, I see it.
So I've been baited enough. No. So I think with Omnitrans, we've tried to do a couple of different things to be able to provide services to connect to warehouses to see what's working, what's not. If we look at the community of Bloomington in particular, which has fairly high warehouse employment, we have one of our OmniRides that serves the area. OmniRide is a micro transit service. It's on demand. We're in the process of applying for a grant to expand span so we can get more with the third shift and cover more of sort of the graveyard shift to be able to get connections there. We've also particularly around San Bernardino International Airport with a couple of different Amazons provided tripper services. That basically we have a route that goes on the main street 90% of the time, but then a couple times a day at shift time deviates off the main route to go to the warehouse front door effectively to save the employees about a mile walk to what would normally be the nearest bus stop. Some of the things that are interesting with that, and we mentioned this at our board workshop and talking about those tripper services, is in some cases that has been very successful. On 5, which is on the south side of the airport, we actually get a fair amount of ridership on that. On the north side of the airport for something very similarly run, timed very much the same, we get very little to no ridership. So in many cases, we're trying the same thing and getting vastly different results, which makes it very hard to figure out what is the right approach. Because again, while we understand they need to be tailored, there's only so many tools in the toolbox to pull from. I think the other thing that is challenging in terms of connecting to the warehouses with transit, again, is a key component of that is the density of land use activity. And when we talk about big box warehouses, by definition, that says not employment, not employee dense. And so going a mile out of the way for a handful of employees becomes very expensive. The other thing I thought that was very interesting in the data that Ginger provided related to growth, some of that is warehouse growth, some of that's employment growth, housing growth. What you see is, again, most of that growth, I think really with the exception of in Montclair, was really on the outskirts of what we consider our service area, but on the outskirts of the transportation network. And that becomes harder. We saw in the time series, we saw a lot of things talking about the flattening of the demand profile. So again, you're not seeing the commute trips, you're seeing all these other trips. Well, that means they're not occurring at regular times. So what we're seeing is geographically a flattening of demand to be more dispersed. We're seeing temporarily a flattening of demand to be more dispersed. All that means it's harder to be able to get one bus or one whatever in the right place at the right time to be super effective.
Mhm.
We need to focus on that. We need to figure out what's the right mix. What we still see, though, is even in that context, we have a core network. 60% of our ridership is on 6 core routes. And we still know that if we want to be the most effective for the most people, there are very key locations that frequency and things to your point about how do you make it where it's time competitive. That means we need to put a lot of resources in very specific corridors so we can be time competitive to draw on all of these. That way it is frequent, convenient for all of your trips, not just for work trips. But that again gets to a trade-off of, do you try to serve everywhere with a little bit of service, or do you try to serve a couple of key areas or fewer key areas with high quality service, and what's the right mix?
I think we're in an era of transition, though. I mean, that's one of the pieces that we see or that we're living through. We've had a lot of tremendous change. We go into Moore's law, and it's even faster than what Moore predicted of how fast the change is coming. So it's keeping up, but also planning, right, at the same time, which can be very tricky. So it's something that, again, observation. It's great that we can have our citizen scientists out there giving us some thoughts on what they're observing on how things are happening, to be able to gather that information and then really think about how do we apply it and removing some of the myths. I mean, I'm going to put on my little professor hat just for a second, but history matters. How your community was developed, how people interact with their communities, how they historically have just lived within the regions that they're in, that all matters. And so it's kind of changing some of the perceptions of where people live and how they live in their communities. And I think it's an opportunity to think that we've had a tremendous number of urban dwellers coming into the area, and then they lived a different type of lifestyle, and maybe they want to bring some of that lifestyle change to this region that is really based more on the thoughts of being in a suburban large area, needing a personal vehicle to get from point A to point B. So it's a possible opportunity out there for change. I'd like to thank all of our speakers once again. It was a very interesting piece, and we'll be, of course, recording and putting that recording up on our website with additional information. If you are interested in any of the presentations, please let us know and we'll get in contact with the speakers and they can share that for you. I'd also like to thank our sponsors one more time for all of their support of this, and maybe a round of applause for our speakers of today. Thank you. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't invite you to our next dialogue, which is looking at on June 20th, same time, from 8 to 10. And our next dialogue, we're going to be discussing the opportunities in developing a sustainable inland port. So inland Southern California port, what are our opportunities of changing some of the dynamics that are occurring within our region around freight and the movement of goods? Because as Ginger showed, the number of warehouses has increased. And I love to be on Amazon, I have to say, and having things just come to my house and not have to shop. So I think it's a phenomenon that's going to stay here with us as we have things brought, and that last mile is to the direct consumer as opposed to the storefront itself. So again, hope to see you June 20th. Have a great rest of your day and week. Take care.